Looks like the camera. Oh, there we go. All right. Hello, everybody. We've got a question already. Cardo says, hello, Cardo. Nice to see you. Proverbially see you. He says, hi, Eddie. Hope you're doing well. I am. Thank you. Why is it that some days I feel like I have more grip and control in my embouchure, while others I feel as if my lips are flabby and too loose and I something my attacks. Oh, sound area attacks. By the way, I follow the 3 levels of rest. Okay, good. So I'm going to break that up into 2 parts because what you're talking about is 2 different things. Sometimes feeling like the grip. By the way, that opens up a whole different can of worms. So we're talking about grip and control. And then on the other days, on the other side, we have area attacks. Okay. So the grip thing. Let's start with the grip thing. There is dry and there's wet. Not everybody plays the same way. If you're looking for grip, that's dry. The wet people slide all over the place. Now, I can speak about that because I was dry. I used to tell people that I wasn't dry, that I was moist. And then when I switched, I realized that's not moist, that's dry. Okay? What I used to do is wet my lips and then rub that off and put the horn on. Okay? And the whole reason to play dry is so that you have that grip, right? And that's not going to move around. Okay? That works great if you're playing lead. That works great if what you're looking for is that stability. Hello, Gabrielle. Nice to see you. So let me tell you, because, everything in music, everything in trumpet is pros and cons. You don't get, there's nothing, and probably everything in the world, really. You don't get all benefit, no bad. There's always some sort of trade-off. Now, sometimes the trade-offs, and this is how they do medicine, right? Sometimes the trade-offs are so insignificant compared to the benefits that they'll give you a medicine that makes your feet swell up, but you're not dying of a heart attack, right? But there's always these trade-offs. Always. Another example from medicine is that they'll give you a medicine that will open up your arteries. But that same medicine is leaching minerals out of your bones. It just happens over a period of decades. But if you take that medicine for decades, you're going to probably have osteoporosis to deal with in your older age. Okay, these are the trade-offs that we have to look at every single day. On the trumpet, and I'm only using that as a readily available example of what I mean by these trade-offs. When it comes to playing dry, there are trade-offs. You get that brilliant upper register. You get more stability on the notes. so that when you go for the note, bam, there it is. You get all kinds of everything that has to do with that stability. That's there. Okay, you get better endurance, really. What we're talking about there is real endurance. There's two kinds of endurance on trumpet. There's genuine muscular endurance where your muscles um, can last longer. Well, why would your muscles last longer when you're playing that way? Because you're not using your muscles all that much. Okay. Then there's the other kind of endurance, which is less under the dry embouchure. And that's how long can you endure the damage that whatever this does to you? Because with that more grip, with the dry embouchure, you've got more friction. That's what's keeping the mouthpiece put, right? To make it stay put. That friction plays a toll on the actual tissues of the lip. Okay, so there is that. That's why a lot of people have very, very pronounced, for lack of a better word, calluses. I don't know if they're calluses, but it looks like calluses on their lips. It's because they've got some of that grip. Now, I thought that was a great way to play, but I was dealing with, and I think this is in the late 90s, I was dealing with flexibility issues. And you know the thing, these trade-offs are present in the equipment too, by the way, right? If you have an instrument that gives you that better stability, or a mouthpiece that gives you better stability, what goes away with that greater stability is greater flexibility. Because that's what the stability is. You're not hitting other notes, right? So getting to those other notes becomes now more difficult. And I had to decide for myself which of those two worlds I wanted to live in, which of those two things were more important to me as a trumpet player, the stability or the flexibility. And I decided that I wanted to be on the flexibility side. I would much rather have a few more cracked notes than and to have that better flexibility, because even though I made my living in that time period mostly playing lead, I still all this time have envisioned myself as a crossover player focusing mainly on two aspects, sort of like what Wynton Marsalis used to do in the old days. I'm a jazz improviser and I'm a classical player. I'm those two things. The things that make you a great lead player sometimes go against your best abilities in those two other areas, especially the way I see those. Okay. I'm not saying people can't pull it off. Of course they can pull it off, but there are pros and cons. There is give and take. So now getting to the point, one of those cons of the dry embouchure is that you've got now dry lips. Not only so, with the dry embouchure, you have a tendency to have lips that are a little bit too curled in, so that you're vibrating more on the skin instead of the mucous membrane. That's a possibility. And then the flip side of that, on the wet side, you have that ability to curl in, curl out. Okay, let's talk about the wet. I've been talking about dry all this time because that's how I used to play. Now I play wet, have been for at least, I don't know, 20 years or more. I can't remember. By the way, switching from dry to wet was one of those things that I was talking about recently in a recent Q and A, where I told you there's these life changes, um, major changes that have to happen, and I've been through a number of them, changing my left hand, changing my right hand, um, the way I breathe, and so uh, going dry to wet was one of those. The words I used to use, Cardo, were very similar to what you just described there. I liked to know, bam, it was there and it's solid. Bam, go, go, go. When you switch to wet, it's sliding all over the place. So one of the ways that you know if someone is dry is, here in Houston, every once in a while we get outdoor gigs in 110 temperatures with 99% humidity, and you're sweating, and your whole face is wet with sweat, and you put your chops up there, and they're not sticking. You put the mouthpiece up, it's not going where you want it. It's sliding all over the place, and you can't play because that's not how you play. That's a dry embouchure. Okay? You look at somebody who plays wet, they play like that all the time. That's one of the benefits of playing wet. It doesn't matter. I can put lip balm on my lips and go. It's not going to slide around because it's always sliding around. I mean, you know what I mean? It doesn't affect the way I play because it's always like that. I can go have some food that's greasy and get grease all over my lips. It's not going to affect the way I play because now I play wet. Well, why would I do that? I already mentioned the flexibility. When you play wet, underneath let's say this is the mouthpiece is hitting here. Underneath, you can change like this. Not in a drastic way. I guess you could in a drastic way, but that's not what I do. But there are movements that happen like that underneath the mouthpiece. And your lips accommodate those movements. That's where the added flexibility comes from. But one of the benefits of playing wet is that even if you do end up playing on the skin, that skin is now wet. And wet skin is going to vibrate more readily than dry skin. It's going to have a different sound. It's going to have a more warm sound, a more natural sound, almost like your voice box. That's what I mean by natural. It almost sounds like your voice. This is to me. Now you have to ask yourself, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Right? What are you trying to accomplish? What kind of playing do you want to do? For me personally, the wet sound, even though it makes it harder for me now to play lead, because I don't get that zing on the notes that I used to get. That's why I tell people, we've got now in Houston. Now, I don't want to say it this way because, I get older and I realize, hey, you know what? That was a really stupid thing to say. But I used to say that there weren't any real lead players in Houston. And that's why I got all that work, was because there was nobody. Now, what I should have added to that is that the guys who were real players, real lead players, didn't want the work or something. There were guys in town, but they weren't playing this stuff. Like salsa gigs. there weren't lead players playing the salsa gigs. There one I can think of who is a genuine lead player, but even him, when I was doing all this stuff, even him he was sort of in trumpet retirement for a while. Had a day job and all that stuff, and so that's what I meant, was that of the people who could do this, none of them were doing it. So that's why I had the lead work. But it wasn't my forte. Playing lead was never my forte. The guys that hired me, if there was someone who could play lead a little bit, when they hired me, it was because I could play lead and do all the jazz stuff too. And most of the time, those guys couldn't do that. Anyway, my point is, now we've got in Houston like half a dozen hardcore real lead players. And I will never play like that. I don't want to ever play like that. Never wanted to in my first place. And I'm not suggesting that they played wet or dry. I haven't talked to them about that. This is all my little theory that I've worked out. Chances are I think they probably played dry. I could be wrong, but I think probably they play dry. I think most trumpet players play dry. I think most trumpet players have that, what you're talking about there. So when we talk about grip, what we're normally talking about is that feeling of dryness, and the mouthpiece goes there and it stays where we put it. Okay? Now, why would some days be better than others? Well, that you're looking at that you can be looking at the type of mouthpiece. Excuse me. The mouthpiece might not be quite like if you know, and I'm not saying change your mouthpiece. You're asking me why this might happen. If the mouthpiece is not designed with a bite, then you're not going to have as often. Like, so let's say something happens to the texture of your lips, greasy food, lip balm because it's winter, and the mouthpiece isn't going to accommodate that, then I can see that being a problem. I can tell you that I understand exactly what you mean by the feel of that. I have, it wasn't so long ago that I can't remember what that's like. That's another reason why I switched. If you switch to wet, and by the way, I'm not telling anybody to switch to wet. It's a hard switch. That's almost as hard as an embouchure change. Really. Because you're gonna, if you switch from dry to wet, it makes you go from sounding like a pro to sounding like a beginner all over again. Anyway, so the grip thing, I don't know, has a direct relationship to the dry attacks, the area sound, area attacks. I'm not sure that has a direct relationship. Now, I would have to actually work with you to know that for sure. But that's the thing. When we talk about grip, we're talking about that hitting there and sticking to where we put it. Okay? Looks like I might need to get a new webcam. That said, it only happens during the Q and A. I don't have this happen during the lessons. It's really weird. So so now area attack could be almost anything. I don't want to be one of those guys that says he knows what's wrong with you. That would be like Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, or in The Hobbit. Gollum saying, "I know what's in your pocket." There's no way Gollum can know what's in his pocket, right? And so in a text medium, I can only talk about what it is that I know. Airy sound comes from, airy sound in the attack comes from a whole bunch of stuff. And it can be, I don't know, I would even be afraid to open that up. Hello, Jeffrey. Now, getting an airy sound, and that's why you said the 3 levels of rest. The very first thing, I never say that do the 3 levels of rest and this will fix it. No, that's the 3 levels of rest is the first tool in your diagnostic to figure out what's going on. If you do the 3 levels of rest and it's still there, then it wasn't the rest. But that's not the only thing that makes for an airy sound. So I'm not sure if you, because there's, what's confusing me here is you say, I feel like I have more grip and control in my embouchure, while others, I feel as if my lips, okay, it just moved, sorry. As if my lips are flabby and too loose and my attacks. And then it says sound airy with a question mark. So something in what you're trying to say there isn't coming out right. So I'm adding airy sound to your attacks. Maybe that's not what you meant. Anyway, so maybe we can talk more about that. Maybe, I don't know if you're still here, but by the way, I should check my website and see if anybody left any questions there. No, okay. All right. Hello, Neo. Nice to see you there. Air balls. Okay. Yes. So air balls, where you go for the note and only air comes out. That's what we call air ball, right? Is that what you're talking about? You go for the note and just air comes out and no sound? Because that would be an issue with the dry embouchure. You have to have, I'll tell you what, so one of the things that can cause that to happen, and with the dry embouchure, it has to be right. With the wet embouchure, you have more of a margin on that. But what we call the pivot, now I don't, hear me out till I finish this, because I don't teach pivot. I teach about pivot. I don't teach people to pivot, because that is another big can of worms, right? Okay, notice that as I go up, the horn tilts down. As I go down, the horn tilts up. The source of most air balls in my students, when I'm working with a student in the lesson, is they hold the horn static. If I try to do what I just did without moving at all, not only am I getting a different tone quality at the top, a different tone quality at the bottom, from the best tone quality that I have in the middle. Not only is the tone quality changing, but it's not as stable. It's not stable on the high notes. It's not stable on the low notes. Because you have, essentially, this is how I was always told, if you don't pivot, you have more more pressure on one lip and less on the other. And that causes issues. You have to have a pivot. Now, I don't teach a pivot because it's Donald S. Reinhardt who started cataloging all this stuff. And I have a friend who's took lessons from Reinhardt. And he told me one day that what I teach, that I call the physical trumpet pyramid, is very similar to what Reinhardt taught him. Okay. He called it stepping in drills or something. I forget the exact wording. So my physical trumpet pyramid is sort of similar to Donald S. Reinhardt's stepping in drills. That's what I was told by a Reinhardt student. Okay. Now, why did I say that? What are we talking about again? Oh, talking about the pivot. So if you read the pivot book, and I only read it once in the 90s, I would love to get my hands on it, get a copy for myself. But he talks about different types of pivot. Some people who are, we call them upstream players, pivot the opposite of what I just showed you. And some people pivot up to the left, down to the right. Some people pivot up to the right, down to the left. And I figured, here's another one of those ultimately complex things. Now, he went through and cataloged all this stuff and has ways to teach people that have those qualities. To me, it just makes more sense to hold your horn in a way that accommodates how you play. And that's been very important for me lately, because I told you about this posture change that I've been going through, where I don't play hunched over anymore like I used to. It's amazing how different my pivot is now that I'm standing up straight, or at least trying to stand up straight. I still get tired sometimes. So what I teach the students, here it goes again. That's so aggravating. What I teach the students is to first practice just pivoting. Think of your wrist as a fulcrum. I wish it would not do that. Think of your wrist as a fulcrum. The wrist does not move. Then the exercise is just put the mouthpiece to your lips, lift your head up, put your head down, lift your head up, put your head down. And what we're practicing is letting the horn just tilt loosely at the wrist here. You're holding the horn and you're holding your wrist, but you're letting it move. And you just do that just to get used to letting the instrument, go where it needs to go. That way, when you're playing, it just goes where it has to go. I'm not thinking tilt up, tilt down, tilt that I'm not thinking of trying to do a pivot. I'm allowing my horn angle to change with my embouchure. The embouchure is dictating the pivot. I'm going to say that one more time, because the way I teach, this is extremely important. I don't teach pivot. I teach holding your instrument in a way that isn't locked. So, and maybe you can get something out of this, right? Do you play the horn locked like that, right? If you play it locked like that, then we're probably talking about this. Okay? Let it loose here in the wrist, and let the horn follow where your embouchure dictates that it should go. Now, the reason I said that if you play dry, this has to be happening This is bothering me. Hey, there we are. And maybe it was dust on the lens. I don't know. Sorry about that. Anyway, the reason I'm saying that this has to be right, it has to be right for everybody. But I think it's worse for the people who play dry. I think if you're playing dry, this has to move. Because there's so much pressure going on in there in the first place. If you play wet, there's, like I said, things can slide around a little bit, and there's not as much. The adjustment can happen more in the way the lips slide around on the mouthpiece. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Try that. If it doesn't work, get back to me and we'll talk about something else. But that, if you were my student and if I understand what you're describing, that's what we would be doing. I would get you to not hold the horn static like that. Let the instrument pivot according to the dictation of your lips. Okay. Neo, hello Neo. Hi, thanks for the dry wet input. Just tried to play wet and it's much more flexible. That's correct. I didn't like the feeling of wet lips. That's why I play dry, but I'm going to experiment with wet playing. You know, it's not for everybody. It should not be about how easy it is or how hard it is. If it was about being easy, I would not have changed. I'm not that kind of person. I want to get the right results, whether it's easy or hard. So for me personally, that's not how I operate. I want the sound that I get. I want the flexibility that I get. It's not easier to play. It's actually harder to play. Hello, Karen. Nice to see you. Cardo says, thank you so much, Eddie. I will definitely try that. Very good. So yes, wet and dry is a big deal. I don't teach one or the other, by the way. I can't remember more than maybe 2 or 3 times in my whole trumpet teaching career that I ever told a student you should switch. Maybe I should, you know. But you know, if we change that, you would be changing how you sound. You know, it reminds me of that story, and I think it was J.J. Johnson. The story about, I think it was J.J. Johnson. J.J. Johnson wanted to take lessons with an orchestra player, and the orchestra guy said no. And he kept asking, and he says, look, if you did what I told you to do, this is the orchestra teacher saying, if you did what I told you to do, you wouldn't be J.J. Johnson anymore. Right? So, and you know, we want to put the actual musical stuff first, not and I see people making this mistake all the time. Well, this guy can play, this is their reasoning, right? This is their logic. This guy can play high, that means he must be really good. So I'm gonna do what he says. Well, if he's a high note player, especially if he's not a lead player, that's a very narrow field. And what they do to do what they to do what they do, how they get to what they do is very specialized, and it doesn't carry over. If you want to sound beautiful, that's not what they're trying to do. So it's that reasoning, that logic that says, oh, he can play high, he must be good. Good at what? There are some high note players, and I haven't complained about this in a while, but there's some high note players on YouTube that if you were to ask them to play a junior high etude, my junior high players are better than they are. Let that sink in. They can play high, and that's it. They can't play will. You put them on a Getchell etude from the Getchell book. And my junior high trumpet students can do a better job than they do. So it's not universal. Just because you can play high means you've got it worked out. It has to do with what are you trying to accomplish. Now, if that's what I don't put these guys down, right? It's not the high note guys that I have a problem with. It's the people who make that conclusion that I have a problem with. The high note guys, they're doing what they want to do. They're successful because they're playing the high notes they want to play. I consider that successful. If you were a high note trumpet player, you come to me for lessons, I teach you how to play high, and now you're putting it high notes all over YouTube, I consider you a successful student. Even if you can't play a Getchell etude better than my junior high students, I still consider you a successful student. If you were my student. And same thing with those guys. I consider them successful at what they do. The mistake is to think that that carries over to what you want to do. That's the mistake. And I've been seeing this for decades now. Well, this guy, no, he might not be a very good player, but he can play high, and we can take that. There was a time when there were orchestral trumpet players making the news because they were going after high note wisdom. And I'm scratching my head. It's like, that doesn't work. They're almost two contradictory pedagogies. So yes. Anyway, I don't remember what I was trying to say. Anyway, Neo says, I want to experiment with wet lips because I often, that's why I was saying, whether it should be wet, whether it should be dry, it should be keeping to what it is you're trying to accomplish. Keep your purpose in mind. Keep your purpose in mind. What are you striving to do? What are you striving to do? And whether you're wet or dry should be according to what it does for that. Anyway, Neil says, I want to experiment with wet lips because I often feel a lot of grip on the mouthpiece that holds me back. Was thinking it's a pressure issue, but this might solve it. See, that's the right way to think. That's exactly what happened to me. I was frustrated. Because I knew what I had in my head. I could hear those big intervals and all that flexibility and that warm tone. I could hear all that. And I wasn't getting that. So this going wet for me was a move in that direction. It's amazing, right? Never know these Q and A's. I never know where they're going to go, what we're going to talk about. This is something that I put a lot of time into for myself, and it's just something we don't talk about much, right? I mean, how many times in this is 192 Q and A's? How many times have we talked about this? We don't really talk about it. And there's actually dozens of subjects like that I've worked my way through as a teacher, as a player. I've worked my way through all these things, and none of them come up until they're needed in the conversation or needed in the lesson or in that student's progress. That's how this works. You have a great teacher, and I don't give myself that title. That's for other people to do. But a great teacher, this is how I see it. A great teacher is like an encyclopedia. You don't look at every word in the encyclopedia. You look up the words that you need right now. But the depth of knowledge in that encyclopedia is immense. So that's how I think a great teacher should be. You have all these answers, not the kind of Gollum answers, right? Not the Hobbit answers. What do I have in my pocket? I can't tell you what you have in your pocket. So, you know what I mean? But having answers that pertain to issues on the trumpet that aren't necessarily personal, but structural. I hope that makes sense. Gabriel says, Eddie, can you show a very easy improvisation to start with a classical player like me that has never tried to make improvisation? Okay. I teach improvisation expansion. That's what you're asking for. If you were to take, whether it's jazz or classical, doesn't matter. It works the same way. You start with just one note. Let's say we're going to do B-flat concerts or C major scale. I like to start on F because if we're doing it with a track, F sounds better more often, okay? So we would start with just the F. And since we're doing classical, let's make it classical. I'm playing a classical composition, almost like the Renzi Overture, but with rhythms, okay? Then we want to add a note. They should be perpendicular. What would that be? You know, the next note up or the next note down, okay? Okay, now let's go down one note. Okay, now up one note. Now we get to where it starts sounding more like a song. Now let's add the D below. Now, we want to do what we can when we're doing that to make music. I was just telling a student yesterday, we were starting a new etude. By the way, let me tell you about this student. I don't have a lot of children anymore as students. Used to be like 70 students a week, all children, right? And so right now, I think I have 2 that can audition for Allstate and stuff like that. They're both junior high. Oh, I take back. There is a high school student. I forgot about him. So very, very different from Now, the All-State student did make region. I haven't heard from him yet about All-State yet. That was last week. He had to miss his lesson because of the audition. Anyway, but in the state of Georgia, my 8th grade student got 6th chair All-State. Woohoo! You know, and the way I look at it, you know, it used to be I had like a dozen all region students and maybe 1 or 2 every year all-state students. Now I don't get that because the numbers are so low. But my percentage is up. The percentage of students I have that make all-state is huge. Huge. So oh, I forgot about another high school student. So yeah, it's like four high school students. And yes, that high school student also made region. I haven't heard from him since the state auditions. So anyway, so he just made all-state. He wants to look forward to the high school all-state stuff. So we pulled out last year's etudes, and we did the last 2 measures. And he's not putting any vibrato. He's not doing any phrasing or anything like that. And I told him, I said, that's not. I know that's how a lot of people practice. Practice the notes first. Practice the rhythms first, and then we'll add music later. No. I don't believe in that. Be musical now. Be musical from the very beginning. There should never be a time when you don't use the right phrasing, where you don't use the right style, where you don't use vibrato. That should just be you, the way you play. Give me 5 notes, I'm going to make music out of them. And that's the way it should always, always be. So when we're doing an improvisation like this, even though it's simplified, it should still, even if it's the first time you've ever done it, it should still sound like something music. Now, if you screw up, you screw up. That's the art of improvisation. It's not that you don't make mistakes. It's that you can in real time navigate those mistakes so that nobody knows you made a mistake. That's improv. It's showmanship. Improvisation is the pinnacle of musical showmanship. Because of this error thing, because of the mistakes, there are mistakes. Even what I just did as a demonstration now had some. What are the mistakes if you're improvising? You meant to do this. You meant to turn left. You turned right instead. So there are quote unquote mistakes. Even with the mistakes, you have to make it sound like it's a piece of music. That's the whole objective. If you're just playing notes, if you're just playing rhythms, you're not improvising. You're just, I had a guy tell me one time, you're just puking out notes. You're just vomiting notes. So we don't want to vomit notes. Right? So when we do an improvisation like this, now it doesn't have to be that sort of march style. You can do a legato style. You can make it more modern sounding. It doesn't matter what the style is. You just need to make music in any style. So let's add a B natural now. Okay. Yeah, so you just keep expanding until you have your whole range. Now, I would strongly recommend that you only do this in a scale that you know. And so Here's the thing. I told you that mistakes happen. It's not that you should only play in the key of C. I'm not saying that. So if I'm doing this and a note accidentally comes out, so let's say I'm doing this and in my mind I'm saying, there it goes again. In my mind I'm saying this is an improvisation in the key of C. If another note comes out accidentally, it's part of the improvisation. It's not a mistake. It's part of the improvisation. If we think of it as a mistake, now it's a mistake. So, now I just played B flat. Now it's kind of hard to fake that because I do have that control to play a C all the way through. By the way, my free improvisation, let me see if I can get a link for that. Number 101 in my free improvisation is all in C. It was my, I think it's on the second page. Okay, it was my intention to only play notes in that C. Okay, here it is. I'll put the link. Only in that key. Now, if I remember right, and I'm not 100% certain, but if I remember right, there were some other notes that got in there along the way. I don't say, oh, well, then I messed up. That's not a messed up. Okay? That was. So think about it. What is improvisation? It's spontaneous creativity. And the objective is to be more creative. And so the reason why we shrink it down to these parameters, just this note, just one more note, just the key of C, is because when we first start improvising and we have all notes available to us and all rhythms available to us, all styles available to us, it's like sitting in front of Mount Everest. We don't know what to do. So when we take and limit the parameters, it makes it easier for us to express ourselves in that spontaneous, creative way. If we go outside of those parameters on accident, we celebrate that. We don't say that's a mistake. Because it's our creativity doing that. We like to say, oh, I just don't have the control. I'm not convinced that the people who do those great improvisations controlled all of that. I think what happens, I've used a metaphor before of a herd of cattle. If you think of a herd of cattle, that each cow represents a different thought, a different idea. Herding that cattle in one direction is how I see the solo, the improvisation. You're trying to get all those thoughts to go in the same direction. If you have a cow that goes off to the side, that's part of how it goes in here. That's part of what happens. You go for this one idea and it goes off on its own. In that way, a jazz improvisation is sort of like a living being. It has a a mind of its own. It can go off this way, it can go off that way. That's what makes it so amazing. If it was only what we could conjure up with our conscious mind, it would be boring. So we embrace what our conscious mind would label as a mistake. We embrace that. That's how I view improvisation, whether it's classical or jazz or blues or klezmer. I've got a klezmer gig coming up. Very excited about that. It's some anniversary at a synagogue. I like playing klezmer music. Anyway, yeah, so that's how I approach teaching beginners how to do improv. All right, any other questions? We've just got a little bit of time left. Gabriel says, I'm trying what you played before on the E flat. Hey, that's cool. You know, improv goes way, way back. I think people used to just make up songs all the time before we had written music. I mean, that's how else would you have a song? You know what can help you improv a lot is memorizing dozens and dozens of different songs, you know, classical stuff. That's one of the things I do with the beginners now. Gabriel says 3 notes. That sounds not bad. There you go. There you go. Yeah, so with the beginners, what I've been doing a lot lately. Now, if they're absolute beginners, I've got 30 songs. I teach them 30 songs. They're in order of difficulty. And that's their first set of songs. But by the time they get halfway through my second level, they're playing, and Karen knows about this. We do the camping songs, so every song that the beginners learn goes into the camping song. Okay, by the time they get to the end of that second level, they're doing Bach, they're doing I forget that one French composer's name. Let me look it up real quick. Let's see here. I have a folder called Songs. They do Bach, like 4 or 5 different Bach melodies. They do Bizet. They do Dvorak, Fauré. That's the French one. Handel, Haydn. I forget who wrote In the Hall of the Mountain King. They do that one. Yes. I even have them doing Massenet. I don't know how to say that, but the elegy that Massenet, so it's a little bit more modern sounding. Rameau, Purcell, Rossini, Schubert, Tartini. I have them doing these melodies. Gabriel says, my wife still doesn't come in the practice room to say to stop, so it means it's not bad. Oh. All right, guys. I guess we'll close it down. Thanks for hanging out. God bless you guys. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week, okay? Have a great weekend. Bye.